Now, I may not have loved the 3-year-old race out in Southern California, but I thought the race down in Gulfstream for 3-year-olds was pretty solid on the main track. Let's take a look at the 10th race from Saturday. This was the Mucho Macho Man Stakes, $100,000, one-turn mile. The horse that most eyes and most attention was paid to was Code of Honor for Shug McGahee. This is a horse that we hadn't seen since running a strong second in the Champagne at Belmont Park last October as a 2-year-old. Stumbled badly out of the gate, came with a nice late run, finished well, looked like he was going to be the wise guy horse for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Unfortunately, scratched the morning or a couple days beforehand. Then there was a little bit of a hiccup where he didn't run in the Remsen. A number of things didn't go right for this horse to run and make his next scheduled start. Ultimately, this is where they get him ready to go, and this is where they run him. And ultimately, it was just an unmitigated disaster. On the flip side, you had pretty strong efforts from the top 2 finishers. Let's take a look at the stretch run of the Mucho Macho Man.
And there's a quarter of a mile left to go. Trophy Chaser, let go by Leonel Reyes, and 2.5 on top. From the outside, it's Mijos. From between horses, Garter and Ty. Then it's Code of Honor. Final eighth of a mile. Trophy Chaser trying to get home. Mijos going to try to nail him on the money. This is going to get close as Mijos starts to get some ground. Here's Mijos. Mijos is in time.
Mijos gets the job done in his stakes debut over Trophy Chaser, who was out there in very game on the front end. They run 1-2, and Garter and Ty rounds out your trifecta at odds of 7-1. The 4-5 favorite, Code of Honor, goes down, finishes 4th off the board. Let's take a look at Mijos. He's run 3 times. He's won 2 of them. He's finished 3rd in his other start. He's over $108,000 in career earnings, owned by Centennial Farms, trained by Jimmy Jerkins, bred by Lister, and Lister in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Jose Ortiz. The pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by Cairo Prince, out of a Lionheart mare named Feline Flatline. Now, again, this is just a very basic way of looking at this, but strictly from a speed figure standpoint, this race, much nicer, much more appealing than the one that we had out on the West Coast. Mijos and Trophy Chaser both earned 90 Beyer speed figures for their 1st and 2nd place finishes here in the Mucho Macho Man. Garter and Ty in 86, and Code of Honor is 77. Mijos, I liked him coming into this spot. I liked what he had done in both of his 2 lifetime starts prior to this spot. He is not a visually impressive horse. He's the kind of horse that you're going to watch him and he is going to grind and grind and grind. He is a little bit late with his lead changes, but that's been him in all 3 of his lifetime starts. But he wants to go and get you. He tries, and I like that. I like to see that from horses as opposed to a horse that sits a pretty good trip and then all of a sudden there is nothing going on, and that's what we saw from Code of Honor. We'll talk about him a little bit more here in a second. Mijos, though, just a very determined effort. The gallop out wasn't brilliant, but it wasn't bad either. I thought it was solid enough. Jimmy Jerkins was very non-committal about where they would run him next, but he said the logical spots would be the next ones to consider down in South Florida. So whether it's the Fountain of Youth or the Holy Bull, the Holy Bull comes first, but you know what I'm saying. One of those races eventually probably leading into a race like the Florida Derby. Big effort from him. I thought this was impressive, and I think, to me, he's a very, very interesting candidate going forward because based on his pedigree, I'm not totally convinced that additional distance is going to be what he wants. I wonder if he is going to be kind of that one-turn type, but we are still at that point, and it's so early on that you have to find out if they can continue on with it. I thought this was a good effort from him. I liked everything I saw. I also was really impressed with what we saw from Trophy Chaser. Now, I expected him to be the outright pace setter in a race that admittedly, on paper, it didn't look like it would be a blistering pace. But then when you see that there were a number of other horses that went out there, Gladiator King, who took a little bit of a bump out of the gate, he was intent on going. He was an overmatched long shot in here anyway. But then you had a horse like Well-Defined forwardly placed. And now obviously you had Trophy Chaser. They got a quarter and 23, half and 45 and 2, 3/4 and 10 and 1. So this was a pretty legitimate go of it. And the fact that Trophy Chaser put away the other speeds, and he only barely got run down at the very end by Mijos, and he galloped out on par with Mijos. I thought this was an impressive effort. Now, the thing I don't know where I stand with Trophy Chaser, I've already thrown him in my horse watch over on DRF.com. For those of you that are having a difficult time finding the DRF horse watch, just this is a kind of a PSA. Go over onto, and I'm going to do it as we're talking right here. You're going to want to go over onto the website, and it's not in its usual spot. In the past, before the website was redone, it was in the entries section. If you click on the 3 lines next to your username and your info, it'll bring up that big menu. The big menu, when you scroll down to this subtitle that says more, it's down at the very bottom. You can click on DRF Horse Watch. That's where you go and input all your stuff. So you're going to want that particularly around time when you listen to Out of the Gate, because we give you some horses that you might want to take a look at. This horse might be mine this week. We'll find out. I thought this was a good effort from him. I don't know if I like him going shorter or the prospects of him stretching out, because the way that this pace kind of unfolded, he was up against it. And I don't know that I necessarily want to immediately throw the blanket over him and say that 2 turns isn't going to be best for him. But I do have a funny feeling, is he going to be kind of a shorter 1-turn type of horse when it's all said and done? Nonetheless, he showed an element, a game, a different piece to his game, a different dynamic that he had yet to showcase. He was the kind of horse that, unless he had the lead, he probably wouldn't go on with it. This time around, he came from slightly off of it. Admittedly, those other horses more so came to a stop, but he went past some horses and then dug in gamely. I thought this was a good effort from him. Garter and Tie, didn't think it was a poor effort whatsoever. He came, weaved through some horses, finished with some interest. Code of Honor, he's the last one that we'll talk about in here, because this was really a disappointing effort. He broke. He was trailing the field, which, again, it's so difficult to really tell what kind of running style this horse is going to have, because he had showed speed in his debut race that he won up at Saratoga, something that Shug's horses usually don't do first out of the box. Then when he stumbled as badly as he did and came from way out of it with a nice rally at Belmont, you can look at it and say, well, the stumble is why he came from as far back, and you would have anticipated him to be a little bit more forward in the run. Well, then when you see a race like this, and I know they were going fast, and this was his first start off of a little bit of a layoff, but he was in last early on. Then Johnny V kind of pushed on him. He made up a little bit of ground, inched forward. The whole field kind of came together going into the far turn. And when the real running started, he had nothing. And the built-in excuse is going to be this was his first start since the beginning of October. These other horses have had recency. He needed one before we're going to see his best. That's entirely possible, but you got to do more than what I saw here for a horse that, he's had some physical problems already, and then all of a sudden you come and you really do no running when the real running begins. This, to me, was a disappointing effort from Code of Honor. He's the kind of horse that in his next start, I won't be betting him, and I won't be picking him. I can almost assure you that, but he'll be one that I'll keep a close eye on, because if he rebounds, then maybe, okay, maybe he just did need one and needed to shake the rust off. If he comes back with another dud, then you got to look at it and say, is a combination of things. Perhaps he wasn't actually as good. And by the way, that Champagne has not come back particularly strong at this point. Maybe he's the kind of horse that was just good early on, and now he's kind of leveling off as everyone else catches up to him. Or have all these sort of little bumps and bruises along the way, if they started to catch up to him already. And at any point, that would end up being a bad thing. We'll find out. It's still very early, but I was not very impressed with what we saw from Code of Honor here on Saturday. I was impressed with the top 2 finishers, though. I thought Mijos and Trophy Chaser both ran very credible races in this year's Mucho Macho Man. Ultimately, Mijos gets the job done by a neck, but both of these top 2, they both earned 90 Beyer speed figures, and I'm sure we'll see them again in another race down at Gulfstream in the coming weeks.